if you want to get better, one of the things that you've got to do is increase your running economy. Running economy, running efficiency is what gets us to run faster. And at the end of the day, if we're doing interval work and we're doing tempo runs and we wring our hands at all the machinations of every workout and all this, and oh my God, I hit my times or I didn't hit my times, and oh my God, what's wrong with me? At the end of the day, we are trying to get faster. That's why we're doing these things. So let's ensure that what we're doing is actually going to help us get faster. One of the ways that we can do this is improving our running economy. Okay? And how do we do that? Well, there's some basic ways that we can do it, and we can maybe throw in some more hills during the off season that really, really work your speed levers, right? You're driving off the front part of your foot. You're increasing your ability to explode. Your knees have to come up, and you are doing almost sort of what we would refer to as almost like hidden speed work, even if you're not just absolutely tearing it up from an actual time standpoint going up a hill. You are getting faster. Hill work is speed work. Got to be smart, though. Comes with peril. Obviously, when you're doing hill work, you have to be cognizant of the reality that there's a lot of strain on the posterior aspect of your lower leg, specifically Achilles, soleus, calf muscles. There's a lot of strain on your plantar fascias. And so be smart. Don't overdo it, okay? Weight training, strength training. Probably one of the biggest laments, I think, my running career looking back is that I didn't take this seriously enough. A lot of it was an information thing. I just don't think that we fully internalized exactly how helpful strength training was, both in injury prevention and in performance. And that performance specifically is increases in running economy. There's a concept, and I have to be careful talking about this, so I really want people to understand the spirit in which I'm talking about this. It's a concept called strength to body weight ratio, okay? In other words, the stronger you are relative to how big you are has a direct impact on how efficiently and how fast you can run, right? And so when you strength train and you increase the resilience and the ability of your explosive fibers, your posterior chain strength, okay, your lateral stabilizers, all of that can end up helping increase your running economy by increasing very slowly over time. And it takes time and investment and restraint in this respect as well. But over time, it will increase your strength to body weight ratio. Now, I caution people against trying to go and do legs 5 days a week. It can't happen because you've got to go and run, okay? But a couple of days a week, make sure you're doing something. It doesn't have to be perfect. I tell everybody, be doing something. Just don't do nothing, and you're going to progress, and you're going to, at the very least, increase your resilience and buffer, right, your ability to not get injured. And not being injured creates availability. Availability then creates your ability to get better. Getting better is what it's all about, right? Running economy most effectively, and the most obvious ways to do it, and what I would posit is got to be front and center, is doing speed work, running faster. And the traditional sort of American model for distance running that I think has been dispensed with in a large way. And, it's been criticized, I think, by some of the best coaches in the world internationally as one of the reasons why American marathoners were largely irrelevant for the better part of 20 years, why we didn't have anybody making any international finals in any event from 1,500 to the 10,000 meters at the World Championships, at the Olympic Games and such. And one of these is the failure to understand that we've got to train every system a little bit most of the year. The traditional American model has been this base, this big, huge base where you just run a whole lot of miles and you jog all of it and you don't really do any workouts. That's an overstatement of the fact, but it's not far from the truth, right? And then there's this middle part where you start doing some tempo runs and start doing some work. And then at the tip, you just do speed work and you sprint a bunch and then you peak, you go to the line, and then you rinse and repeat. Listen, that is periodization. That is not a 100% flawed approach to training. It's just not the best. And we know that you've got to work a little bit on your anaerobic side of the coin, recruit those white fibers. You got to do a little tiny bit of something that resembles neuromuscular stimulus, aka speed work, a little bit most of the year. You've got to not neglect your high anaerobic system. So you should be doing something when you hit the zones of aerobic threshold down to lactate threshold a little bit a lot of the year, right? But one of the things that we can do is treat our training like kettles of water on a stove, all right? Keep the most important elements of your training during whatever period you're in on the front burner, turn it up high, make sure that kettle of water is boiling. Then you can move a kettle of water that is not as important from a training standpoint, a system that you're not trying to overwork during this particular time period, and put it on the back burner or on the middle burner. Do not turn that burner off. That's the old training model that I don't think is super effective. Keep it on simmer. Keep it on simmer. Always have your ability to run at the thresholds, aerobic down to anaerobic threshold. Always keep that water on simmer, right? But sometimes, especially when you're in the thick of a marathon build, all right, that kettle of water probably needs to be on boil on the front burner. And then your speed work kettle might need to be on simmer on the back burner, but you never turn it off. Okay? To increase running economy, and running economy is efficiency. It's how much energy does it take you to run at a faster pace for an extended period of time. All right? There are ways to do that. And you got to be smart. You got to structure it. But you've got to be able to hit some faster sessions. 400-meter reps, 300-meter reps, maybe more max VO2 work, right? We're talking about anaerobic work where you're running it way faster than max VO2, sprint work, okay, to some degree, all the way up to 100% of MVO2 work, which is the pace that you can run all out for, 9, 10, 11 minutes at a time. That's fast work. Building big recoveries and just get used to just running faster. And you can do maybe a session like that once a week, once every 10 days. A session that maybe you would not do in its entirety with the entire session dedicated to that, okay? 7 weeks out from a marathon where your sessions need to be more like, all right, 6 miles at a little bit under goal marathon pace, steady goes, steady Eddie, and then maybe just a small little dose of work down at MVO2 pace, maybe even slower to MVO2 pace, right? Touch on paces in larger volume and more frequency during periods between your marathon macro cycles, okay, to increase your running economy. Because at the end of the day, folks, here's what we've got to do. We've got to make marathon pace feel easier. There's a massive neurologic and a massive muscular component to it, okay? A massive neuromuscular component to simply just running faster, more efficiently. Add a little bit more strength training to that, a little bit more quote-unquote speed work to that, okay? Cut your volume a bit so you don't have this overwhelming, just deep-seated fatigue. Maybe cut your volume between your marathon cycles, okay? Maybe cut your volume by 25%, right? Go from running 80 miles a week to running 60 miles a week. But do a session like 12 times 400 meters at your goal 3K race pace with a 100-meter jog recovery in between. right? You may not do that workout or that kind of work very much when you're training for a marathon because those paces are not as specific to the marathon. And so specificity has to change when you're doing a marathon training block versus a non-marathon training block, right? Now, when we look at doing weight work, lowering your volume, doing more speed work, trying to increase our efficiency, right? We also need to build in races, right? We say, well, if I'm only running 2 or 3 marathons a year, what am I going to do? Listen, man, every December we've got the Jingle Jog, right? We've got the presents for toddlers, 5K, right? Then on New Year's Day, you've got your New Year's resolution 5K, right? During the summer, you've got the Firecracker 5K on July 4th, right? We've got all these things that we can go and do year round where there's a plethora of 5Ks, 10Ks, things that we can do. Now, here's what we know. If you invest in training for a 5K, training for a 10K, and race at paces that far exceed the very staid, very controlled marathon pace that we're all comfortable with, guess what happens? It's going to eventually make marathon pace not just feel easier, it's going to make marathon pace faster. If you've run 3:03 in the marathon, you've run 7 flat per mile. Your dream is to break 3 hours. You've got to run 6:50 pace to do that. You have to try to figure out how to make 6:50 pace feel the way 7-minute pace used to. Well, maybe we ought to train for the Firecracker 5K. Maybe we ought to train for the Jingle Jog. Maybe we ought to train for the New Year's resolution 5K, right? In between our marathon, quote unquote, blocks, so that we can move the needle from a running economy standpoint, so that from a neuromuscular standpoint, we have made the changes that are going to allow us to continue to climb the ladder of excellence, no matter how we define that, right? Now, one of the things that I see is that there's also dangers of going too low on volume. And this is another paradox, right? I said, drop your volume, increase your speed, increase your attention to the kettle of water that's boiling regarding strength work. But here's the problem. We have mitochondrial volume and mitochondrial density. And then there's even mitochondrial fusion, which is even really cooler, which is basically mitochondria. It's like a system. It's like an interrelated network of mitochondria that will allow you to deliver outstanding performances in running because you are getting oxygenated blood to working muscles and converting the oxygen into energy, ATP, which then allows you to run really fast, really far. How do you build mitochondria? Mitochondrial density, volume, running a lot, okay? So what you can't do is ascend the stairs to one level and then ascend the stairs to the next floor and then take 14, 15, 16 weeks where you literally go and cut your volume by 75, 80%. Your body will not maintain your mitochondrial density and efficiency. It will shrink it if you don't use it, okay? 3 to 7 days of lack of aerobic exercise or stimulation or significantly reduced, then already reduces the markers for what we refer to as mitochondrial biogenesis. Scientific word for the body's making mitochondria. 3 to 7 days, the markers are there for reduced mitochondrial biogenesis. 8 days to 14 days, you actually shrink your actual mitochondrial capacity. It actually, they wither, gone, okay? So that's why I always tell everybody, you can go about 8 days with complete inactivity, sitting on the couch, doing nothing, and you're going to lose very, very little. But once you get to 8, 10, 11, 12 days, 11 weeks, 12 weeks, then you've got a problem because you have descended the ladder and you basically started to undo all the work that you got. Now, here's what we know about mitochondrial volume. It is almost infinitely buildable over the course of 5, 6, 8, 10 years. It builds and builds and builds and builds as long as you maintain a certain level of volume in your running. So drop your volume between your marathon microcycles, okay, a bit, 20%, 25%, maybe even 30%. Do not drop it 50%, a 75, 80%, or 100%. Okay? Because what you're doing is you're walking all the way back down to the ground floor, and you're going to spend almost the entirety of your next marathon macro and then the microcycles within a macrocycle and the mesocycles. Okay? You're going to spend that time trying to regain what you built. And then what happens is you unfortunately get a similar, possibly similar, possibly frustrating result. Okay, and these aren't absolutes. Everybody knows that there's an outlier out there or an example of somebody who went and rocked their marathon on lower volume and all that. But I'm talking in generalities here about how to go about doing this. Okay, you're going to possibly get a similar frustrating result of a lack of improvement that you can also get by constantly being in the chase. So don't be constantly in the chase, but don't also abandon running for 50% of every year and expect to improve either, because that is not consistently good.